right, y'all. We'll go ahead and get started. I'm sure some people will be coming in over the next couple minutes still. Appreciate y'all taking the time to join tonight, especially you guys that were part of this over the summer. Hopefully I'll have some interaction from y'all tonight because I know this topic is a little bit different for especially the new guys who maybe have never even thought about like what their athlete identity is. So I hope that there's a lot of engagement tonight because it helps more if it's interactive. You know, if you have questions or you kind of speak to how you think about athlete identity, your own identity, and then we can kind of talk about how that relates to your development. So let's start by kind of defining what I'm talking about with athlete identity. So just in terms of like the field of psychology, there's a theory. It's by a guy named Erik Erikson, and he came up with this theory of how we develop socially, like how we relate to other people and relate to ourselves over time, over different stages of our life. And in the adolescent stage, which starts with the onset of puberty to about 18 to 20 years old, identity formation is a major part of our development. So the stage that all of you are going through right now is that you're kind of figuring out, who am I? What do I believe? What are my likes and dislikes? What do I want to do? How do I relate to other people? How do I compare myself to other people? All of this is going on in your life. And you have various identities within that. You have like your family identity, your race, your socioeconomic status, your religion. But what I want to focus on is athlete identity, because I think that's an under-discussed piece of development, especially at this stage. So I want you to think about, and I had the guys this summer like actually write this down, and do this if you want to. I think it can be useful, and hopefully you'll kind of do it throughout the night, whether it's on your phone or pen and paper or whatever you have available. I want you to think about your own athlete identity and what does that mean to you? Like when I ask you, how do you view yourself as a baseball player? What does that mean? And if anybody wants to share, like, how do you view yourself as a baseball player? And there's no right or wrong answer with this. But when you think of your baseball player identity, like a coach asks you, like, what are your qualities as a baseball player? How do you identify yourself as a baseball player? What comes to mind? Go ahead, George.
I'd say for me, like, I play multiple positions, so I try to think that I'm someone that can be useful and like be able to fill a spot if there's not anybody else for it.
Okay. So like willing to play wherever.
Yeah.
Perfect. What else? Go ahead, Adrian.
For me, it's always like, how can I get better each day? Just how I can improve myself mentally or on the baseball field.
Okay. So you would consider part of your athlete identity like striving to be better.
Yes, sir.
Okay. What else? I'll give some examples. Like maybe you consider yourself a good teammate. Maybe you consider yourself like more of a selfish teammate. You're focused more on your development and your process, or maybe how you play in a game rather than how the team plays in a game. Not necessarily a bad thing, especially at this stage in your development, but maybe that's something that comes to mind. It's like I'm more focused on me than on the team. Maybe you consider yourself a hard worker, and whatever that means. Or maybe you consider yourself a starter. Like even that part of your identity. I'm one of the better players on my team. I always have been. I'm a starter. And so what I'm getting at with this is we structure everything around who we are as an athlete around this identity. And a lot of this is created based on how we compare ourselves to other people. I mentioned last week, I'm actually going to turn this, see a little better. I mentioned last week that like that comparison of ourselves toward other people can be a harmful thing sometimes. We're focused too much on how we compare to the person beside us, then that kind of limits, that can stunt our development. And it can to a degree. But the truth is, like, it's just inevitable that we will do it. We start comparing ourselves to other people at the age of 4 years old. We start doing it really early, and we do it our entire lives. And you'll hear people say, oh, I don't care what others think about me, or I don't relate. I don't compare myself to other people. Honestly, they're probably lying when they say that, because we all do it. And I think it's something that we have to address and we have to come to grips with, because if we don't acknowledge it and we don't understand that it's what we do, it can kind of lead us in the wrong direction, or we can have this unhealthy view of this thing that we do, that we all do. So your identity as an athlete is built off of your experiences mostly. All of you play baseball now probably because you've been told throughout your life that you're good at baseball. And you probably enjoy the game because you've been told that you're good at it. That's kind of what we do. Like, our hobbies and the things that we enjoy often are built out of us being told that we're good at something. And so you build your identity around that. You build your identity around this idea of being good at whatever it is that you're doing, this thing that you're doing. So I don't think anybody here that's in this program would say, man, I really suck at baseball, but I'm playing it anyway, right? I don't think anybody would say that. And so the reason I bring that up is we go to a broader aspect of how we deal with adversity. And identity, our identity and what we say about ourselves relates a lot to that. And ultimately, my goal with these meetings is to help you deal with adversity better. Some of you maybe are pretty good at it. Some of you maybe aren't very good at it. Some of you may have never actually dealt with adversity before, at least on the baseball field. Maybe you've always been better than everybody else, and you've always played well, and you don't know what it's like to struggle yet. If you play long enough, you'll get there, but maybe you haven't experienced that yet. And so understanding this identity that you've built in terms of who you are as a player will hopefully help you understand how you handle adversity as well. So I'll have you think about, I want you to think about the last time you played a horrible game. Maybe you made a couple errors, or on the mound, you gave up a bunch of hits and runs. At the plate, maybe you struck out 3 times. I want you to think about that bad outing, the last time you played poorly. And I want you to think about the things that you told yourself about why you played poorly. Because that is what ends up shaping our identity, how we explain the things that happen to us. And I won't ask anybody to share, unless anybody wants to. If you want to, raise your hand and I'll let you speak. But I don't really expect anybody to, because this is a pretty vulnerable thing to acknowledge the things that we say to ourselves. So I'll give my own example. So my junior year of high school, I played JV baseball back in North Carolina, where I grew up. I got cut my freshman year. Actually, I'll start with that. So I was an undersized kid. I was a late bloomer. I was young for my age as well. I started my freshman year of high school at 13 years old. So I was really young for my grade. And I got cut my freshman year, cut completely from the team. So I didn't play for my school team my freshman year. And I remember talking to my dad the day that I got cut. I was devastated. I ended up going home from school early because I just couldn't contain myself. I was crying the whole time, and I was just a mess. And I remember talking to my dad, and I asked him, why have we done all the things? I played Little League growing up and played Pony League and all these leagues growing up into my freshman year of high school. My brother was an all-state player. He was drafted out of high school. And that's where my baseball identity really stemmed from, was comparison to my older brother. I thought, my older brother was a great player, and I thought that kind of meant that I would be too, because I was associated with him. And because I had already had that mindset, I didn't really work as hard as I probably needed to, because I was undersized, because I was younger. And so I ended up getting cut. And, I talked to my dad. I was like, well, why have we done all these things? My baseball career's over. I'm never going to play again, and all this stuff. And it really shaped in that moment the way that I talked to myself about who I was as a player. Just baseball, not anything outside of that, but just as a baseball player. I had really low self-esteem, really low confidence. So I played, over the summer, and played a little bit of fall ball, and then tried out again my sophomore year, and then, made JV. And then junior year, as you all probably have in mind, junior year is the year that you expect to be on varsity, if not before then. But I think all juniors expect, I should be on varsity this year. I had that same expectation. I started out on JV. And again, I built this identity, even despite being cut my freshman year, that I was a good player and that I deserved these things. I expected and deserved to be at the level that I thought a good player would be at. And I wasn't getting those results. And because of the way that I described myself as a good player, I made excuses for the reasons that I didn't. Oh, the coaches don't like me. They're playing favorites with these other kids. All these other kids came from the same middle school. I came from a different one. Like they're being discriminatory against me because I came from this other middle school. I was figuring out every way that I could tell myself that it wasn't my fault, that it was somebody else's fault. And that helped in terms of my view of myself as a good player. Like I still felt confident in myself, but the harm in that was that I didn't actually work as hard as I needed to become a player. And that's really where my struggle came from, is I didn't understand really how to work hard. I just relied on my talent, or what I thought was my talent, because I was a good little league player. I was good in middle school. And then everybody else got bigger. I didn't, because I was a late bloomer in puberty. I was still really small, and I just wasn't good enough. So I say all of that to say, like, when I had bad performances, I did everything I could to refrain from taking accountability for that. If I struck out 3 times, I remember this. When I was 9 years old, I was playing my first year of Little League. I struck out looking, and I slung my bat, and I cussed out the umpire at 9 years old, and I got ejected from the game. And I remember doing that. Like, I blamed the umpire for the fact that I struck out 3 times. And I did that all through high school too. And so my athlete identity, my identity as a baseball player, was that I was good. No one else recognized it, and everyone else was like jealous of me or something like that because of how good I thought I was. It's a terrible mindset to have. Luckily, I actually physically was good enough, and I kind of figured it out where I was able to play college baseball, and that's when I really started to get a better sense of who I was and build a stronger identity, for lack of a better word. But I never even thought about these things until I got to college. And so my hope is that by kind of talking about this idea and getting you to think about how you identify yourself as a player, how you explain the things that happen to you, can, maybe if you don't have a great way of thinking about that, can help you kind of reconsider. So I'm going to give you a minute to just kind of think and brainstorm a little bit. That last bad game that you had, what did you say to yourself about why that happened? What did you say to yourself in the moment? What did you think about yourself or say to yourself after the game? And then I want you to think about the good performances that you've had and do the same thing. Like, what do you say to yourself when good things happen? What do you say to yourself when you get a hit or you make a good play? What do you say to yourself in the moment? What do you say to yourself after it in post game? And some of you may not know. You may not even be aware of it. But I want you to just think about that. And if anybody wants to share, you're welcome to. But I'm going to give you a couple minutes, or maybe a minute or so, just to kind of think about that. So what I want you to take from this piece about identity specifically is I want you to start to build the identity that you prefer to have. So maybe you want to be a good teammate, but if you're being honest with yourself, maybe you're not really right now. Maybe you don't support your teammates in the way that you should. Maybe, if someone's playing over you, you kind of secretly hope that they don't do well so you can get more playing time, right? Instead of hoping that your teammate does well because they have the opportunity. Because if they do well, that means the team does well. Or maybe you say you're a hard worker, but deep down, like at practice, you're really not as invested or as engaged as you could be. And this is a hard thing to come to grips with. You really have to be honest with yourself. And that's not always easy to do. Because again, if you've built this identity around being a good baseball player, then you have an idea about what it means to be what are the qualities of a good baseball player. And maybe you don't meet all those qualities right now. And that's okay, because you're all developing, right? You're not supposed to be a perfect and great player right now. You're supposed to be who you are and then striving to be who you want to be. We talked about goal setting last week, and maybe now that we're kind of getting this idea of identity, maybe you set a goal for yourself through the fall to improve in this one area of your identity, to try to build this piece of your identity that you want it to be and work to try to build it to make it so. So that's another aspect of this, kind of an activity that you can do maybe tonight after we're done, or through this next week, is to create the identity that you want. Well, who do you want to be as a baseball player? Who do you want to be as an athlete, even outside of baseball? But in terms of athletics, like, who do you want to be with that? And are you there yet? And if you're not, what goals can I set for myself to get myself there? I'm sure you all would say, like, I'd like to be a mentally tough player. I'd like to be a player that when adversity hits, like, I can work through it. And that's probably one of the biggest challenges for young players to overcome in high school, even in college, even in professional baseball. Yeah, go ahead, Jonathan.
Yeah, I was just about to share something. So, a time I faced adversity. So, at PBR, like 2 years ago, my max exit velo. So this was freshman year, and my max exit velo was 87.9 or something. And I went just this last year, right? Just last February for the preseason showcase, and my max exit velo was 80. So I went down a lot, right? But I just kept telling myself, it's just a part of the process. Like, there's gonna be ups and downs. And the next showcase, I did one earlier this summer, and my max exit velo was like 96.7 or something like that. So
that's a great example of that. Like, you can, and we could all think of, man, you go, like, you're almost at 90 as a freshman, and then 2 years later, when you're supposed to be so much better, that you don't hit this velocity. And I'm sure anybody who's a pitcher can relate. Like, everyone's trying to throw harder, right? Where you should throw harder as you get older to a certain level until you hit your, maybe upper 20s into your 30s. But we should consistently be growing. What happens when we don't? What happens when we have a setback, right? What do you say to yourself when you have a setback? And Jonathan, I love the way that you said that. You phrase it as part of the process. And I'm a big Nick Saban fan. I'm an Alabama football fan. Nick Saban is one of the greatest coaches of all time. If you don't know college football, one of the greatest coaches in any sport. And he preaches the process, the process, the process. And again, that process, what we talked about last week, is what does it take to get to the outcome? And so, Jonathan, your example, like, what your process is. Your process and everything you do is to try to get better. Well, this one day, it shows that wasn't working, right? You could have just abandoned everything and think, okay, I need to just start over, or why did I regress so badly? But you understood that part of that process are peaks and valleys, right? You're going to have good days and bad days. And as long as you're still moving toward your goal and you trust in whatever it is that you're doing, one bad day doesn't mean you need to throw away everything else. So that's awesome. That's a really great example of how to use the self-talk to keep yourself going, how to compartmentalize, the talk about seeing the forest through the trees. Like, the tree is this one day versus the forest, which is your entirety of development. That's really awesome. Thank you for sharing that. So again, I'm going to bring this back up as we go through the rest of these skills that we're going to be building through the rest of the fall. But everything that we're doing is to try to get you to your peak performance, whatever that is for you, as consistently as possible. So we want to try to not necessarily raise your ceiling, but get you up to your ceiling as much as you can individually, whatever that is. And understanding what that ceiling is and being realistic about what your ceiling is, what your identity is, can help you achieve that, right? If you're a freshman, then yeah, you probably shouldn't be at the same level as a senior. But if you're a senior, maybe you're not at the level of the other seniors, right? Or maybe you're not at the level that you think you should be. How do you build it to where you can raise to that level by the time you want to get there? How do you build the identity to be a resilient player, right? To be process oriented, to have this growth mindset, all these things that we talk about that I think everybody agrees are really important in all facets of development. How do we do that? So by the first step in this is what we're doing tonight, acknowledging like, what is my identity? What do I want my identity to be? And how do I create steps to get to that point? And being really honest with yourself. And I think it's a good discussion to have with your coaches, with your parents, with teammates, if you feel comfortable with it, because they're hard questions to answer just by yourself. This is where it's good to have other people to talk to. What do you want your identity to be as a pitcher? I want to be a power pitcher, but I throw 75 miles an hour. Okay, well, if you want to have that mindset, then what do you need to do? You want to have that identity as a pitcher. What do you need to do to achieve that? As a hitter, I want to be really aggressive at the plate, but I keep taking 0-0 fastballs, right? I can't convince myself. Okay, what do you need to do to get to that point? What do you need to build to shape that identity that you want to have? And acknowledging what your actual identity is. Does anybody have any questions about that? As you're kind of thinking about what yours is, what thoughts do you have coming to mind, or any questions that you have coming to mind? Go ahead, Adrian.
So, what comes to mind is like a question is, say you just had like a terrible game.
Mm-hmm.
What is one thing that you can like say to yourself after that game to help you get better mentally and move on to the next game?
Here's the tough part. I don't know that there's one thing that you can say to yourself. I think understanding what you are saying to yourself is kind of just acknowledging like what it is that you are saying to yourself. There's a belief system around kind of this idea of elite performance. And it used to be that they used to teach like you shouldn't say negative things to yourself, right? If you're saying negative things, you need to stop it and then convert it to positive things. That was the belief for a long time, and some people still teach that. I've come to the mind of understanding that we are going to say negative things about ourselves. Like we're just going to. That's how kind of humans operate. And so understanding that you're gonna think you suck, right? You're gonna dog cuss yourself. Being aware of that and being accepting of that, but understanding that just because you say it doesn't make it true. So, Adrian, to that point, I think what I would say is like, not necessarily that you need to say something to yourself, but acknowledging that whatever it is that you say doesn't ultimately mean anything, right? Unless you put belief into it. And then trying to, as objectively as possible, understand what happened and what caused it. Why did you have a bad game, right? Sometimes you chalk it up to that guy was better, that other team was better. Sometimes it was, I didn't have a great week of preparation. I got a lot of other stuff going on, whatever it might be, but just being really honest with, what caused it, what happened, and acknowledging that, things do happen. And sometimes we do have bad games. And then once you can accept it, that these things are a part of the process, it makes it a lot easier to move forward and understand, all right, this was a bad one. This is going to happen. I want to learn from it. I want to understand what happened. And then I want to trust, like, do I trust in what I'm doing through the week to give myself a chance for success? And if you trust what you're doing, then it allows you to kind of let the bad games go. Does that make sense?
Yes, sir. Yeah.
Okay. Does that kind of answer where you were going?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Go ahead, Jonathan.
I feel like when I have a bad game, like against Golden in the spring, they had a kid throwing like upper 80s, like 87, 89, and I struck out 3 times in a row. And I just told myself, like a lot of, like, it's not in my control. Like he was just better than me that day. Like I can't be mad about things that I can't even control. Like I prepared well. I did everything to my best ability, but he was just better than me. Right. So
yeah.
The next week we're playing rifle and they have one good kid. His name's Logan Gross. He just graduated. He's still in like, like lower 90s. And then, first AB struck out. Yeah. He got me on like a fastball, which it was not a strike. It was pretty high. I was like, okay, I can't really control that. And the next AB, I think I like popped out to the catcher and I was like, it's just a hard fastball. He's throwing it up. The ump's calling it up. I can't control it. And then the next AB, I ripped a line drive off his fastball. I just got a good pitch. So, I feel like really, you can't be mad if you perform bad, if you did everything you could to prepare and everything. And, the kid's just really good because baseball is really hard.
Yep. And especially as a hitter. That's why I stopped hitting when I was 14 and became a pitcher. It's a lot easier. But to those points, like what you're saying, so you have to be honest and acknowledging what happened. If the other person's just better, then that's the case. And you just know that you have to continue to work to get to a better level. You have to work to try to elevate yourself. I think what we tend to go to is a defense mechanism and our team was notorious for this, where we would start like belittling the other player. And this was a really frustrating thing as a coach, but our guys would essentially start talking crap about the other pitcher when we were getting two hit. And it's a defense mechanism, right? Because if you can convince yourself that the other person isn't as good as you, it allows you to then deflect the blame for what's going on. It allows you to maintain the I'm a good baseball player identity. So being honest, and it's not saying that you're not good by being honest, but being honest of like, okay, that person's a little bit better than I am. I know what I need to do to get to that level. Right. And again, you talked about, I can't control this. I can't control that. Understanding what is within your control and what isn't. Right. If you strike out because you look at a 2-strike fastball down the middle, that's within your control. Right. You could have swung at that. You could have had your approach to where you attack that ball. And saying, well, that's a bad call or that's not within my control, it'll protect your ego, but it's not going to help you get better for the next at bat. It's not going to help you get better moving forward. So it's a tough balance there of understanding what's true and what we tell ourselves. And hopefully those things match, right? Hopefully we're telling ourselves the truth, but that's not always the case. Tracy, go ahead.
So let's just say like you had like the best tournament of your life and you're just really happy. What can you say to yourself to not let you get too cocky?
Do you think it's a bad thing to be too cocky?
Yeah.
Why?
Like a few seasons ago, we played this team and we saw the record and it was not good at all. And they were like 3 and 40. And we played them and we got way too cocky and we tied them. It was like 2-2 off the worst pitcher we've seen. And we were just so happy we were playing that team that we got too cocky and we did not play well.
Okay. So the reason I asked that, this term cocky has a lot of connotations with it. There's a lot of different definitions. What I would say you're talking about is more being complacent. You know what complacent means? Complacent is like, I feel like I'm already good enough. And I guess you could call that cocky too, right?
Yeah.
Baseball's a really hard sport. And so sometimes being cocky can be beneficial, right? Sometimes you have to convince yourself that you are good enough. But I think there's a difference between thinking you're good enough in the moment and thinking kind of globally that you're already good enough. Does that make sense, Tracy?
Yeah.
So what I would say with that is like taking the confidence and taking the feedback from a good weekend or a good set of games is great. And you want to take that. Like, obviously we all want to do well, but where that can be trouble is thinking that you've already become good enough. And so the way you can combat that is, again, part of it is through goal setting, right? Are you setting high enough goals for yourself to where you're challenging yourself to get them? How many of you, I'll ask this kind of related to this. How many of you I want you to raise your hand if you've never experienced failure in baseball. Okay. Failure is inherently part of the game. And that's why I think that's why most people enjoy the challenge of it. If we're not failing, we're not challenging ourselves enough in whatever realm of life we're talking about. Athletics, school, hobbies, whatever it is. We want the challenge. We want things to be somewhat difficult because then we feel the accomplishment of achieving it. Tracy, back to your point, is this like a personal example for you?
Yeah.
Okay. So this tournament that you're talking about this weekend, what would you say the level of competition was that you faced? Like, was this competition not up to your level? Was it equal with you? Was it a little bit better than maybe you thought it would be?
It was kind of in the middle. Like, there was teams that were definitely better than us, and then there was teams like the one we played that were worse than us, but we got cocky.
Okay. So I think that that's all part of this process too, of like understanding that comparison. If you got an at bat versus the Rockies, as bad as the Rockies are relative to Major League Baseball, they're still better than all of us, right? They're still Major League Baseball players. If you got an at bat against a Rockies pitcher and you had a jam shot infield single, would you be happy about that? Right. You'd be stoked. You'd be ecstatic. If you're facing a kid throwing 55 miles an hour and you got a jam shot infield single, are you going to be happy about that? No, right? Because you're focusing on the outcome relative to the level of competition. And that's really kind of where cockiness, the bad side, I guess, of cockiness comes from, is where you have this unmatching belief about your own talent level related to the competition that you faced. So the bad side of cocky is thinking that you're better than everyone else, regardless of whether you are or not. But you have this belief and this unworthy belief that you're better than everyone else. And what that leads to is complacency, is this feeling that I don't need to work hard to get better because I'm already better than everybody. And so this is a long way around to get to the answer I think that you're looking for, Tracy. The way that you combat that is understanding that is focusing on the process, right? Are you still focused on the process of getting better, which is leading to the results? Or do you think the results are the answer to the fact that you've already made it, or to the question of whether you've already gotten good enough? When that's the case, when you think the results say that you are good enough already, that's the bad side of cockiness. That's where you see, playing down to opponents because you think you don't need to do as much. You think you don't need to work as hard. And so if you stay in the moment of, I had a great weekend, I went 8 for 12 and had 4 extra base hits and did all these really good things, man, that's showing that my process is really working. That makes me want to work more into my process so I can keep that up. Whereas, man, I had a really good weekend. The work paid off. I've made it. Now I don't need to work as hard because I'm good now. You see the difference with that? So I think that's the message. And that's a message for not only an individual, but for a team as well. Like you said, Tracy, teams can fall into this, right? Oh, we're way better than this team, so we don't need to play as hard today. We don't need to do as much, right? When you get into your spring season, you know that for us, it was facing Denver West and Lincoln and, these teams that aren't very good in our league, that we can just kind of go out there and out-talent them. But the thing we have to be aware of is, okay, well, we may play these teams, but we've got, Mullen in 2 weeks, and we've got Cheyenne Mountain and these other teams that are at the top of 4A. So if we're not working hard this week, we'll beat the teams. We may beat the teams that we're vastly better than, but are we raising our talent and our production to the level where we can compete with the teams that are probably better than we are? And so that's the balance of it. I think in terms of an individual, you can control that yourself. In a team atmosphere, that's where ideally team leaders kind of take in that role. And I know that can be difficult at a younger age in terms of like social dynamics and things like that. Maybe the coaches need to do that. But that's where teammates can hold each other accountable. We'll talk about accountability and like what does it mean to be a good teammate kind of later in the fall. But one of those pieces is being willing to call people out when it's necessary, and doing it in a way that's supportive of the team, that's showing that like I'm not doing this because I don't like you. I'm doing this because you're an important piece of this and we need you for all of us to be better. And then learning how to kind of take that criticism as well. Tracy, does that help answer your question? I know that was kind of a long roundabout, but does that help?
Yeah, it does. Thank you.
Okay. Anyone else have any thoughts come up as you were kind of thinking about your own identity, your athlete identity? All right. Well, I don't want to hold you any longer. So just be aware, like as we move forward, I'll have to talk to Ryan. I'm not sure. I know next Monday is Labor Day. So I'm not sure if he wants to have a meeting or not. I'll check with him and I'll post a message in group me if we will meet next Monday. But as we move forward through the rest of the fall, the stuff that we're going to be talking about, these skills, these kind of mental skills that we'll talk about, are all going to be building into how do we create this identity that is resilient, that is effective for us, that helps us become better and helps us develop, rather than being something that creates a mentally weak athlete that crumbles under pressure. All right. If anybody has any last questions, I'll hang out for a minute. Otherwise, thanks for your time tonight, guys. Again, if you have questions throughout the week, feel free to shoot me a message on GroupMe. And yeah, I'll see y'all maybe next week, but I'll post an update in GroupMe.
Cool. Thank you.
Yeah. See you guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.